This video is about how to tie several essential knots that I've found useful in the wilderness environment. First of all, we go over a little bit of terminology. This is a length of rope. It has a working end, which is the sort of one end that you're going to use to tie the knots. And then the standing end is the long end of the rope that extends into the rest of the rope. When you make a bend in the rope, you get a little bend like that called a bite. That'll be useful when I explain some other knots later on. So with rope knots, the very most basic knot of all is the overhand or granny knot, and I think everyone is familiar with that. Essentially what it is just a simple rotation once round of the working end over the standing end and then through the middle, and you have the basic granny knot. At face value, it doesn't seem like a very useful knot. And there's the old saying, if you can't tie knots, tie lots. So people who would use this knot might have to tie several of them to make it effective. It can be very useful, however, if you use it for a stopper knot. When you're tying various other knot types, it prevents the rope from slipping through. So it adds a little bit of rigidity to a knot. So it can be very useful. So this would normally be tied in the end of a rope. And in fact, it can often be tied in the end of an abseiling rope to prevent people from abseiling off the end of their rope, assuming the rope doesn't reach the ground. Okay, so that's the overhand knot. The next knot we're going to look at is slightly different but quite easy to tie, and it's a very common knot used by climbers. It's called a figure 8 knot. Okay, the figure 8 knot is tied in roughly the same way. You sort of go around like that with the working end, but you go around once more before passing it through the loop, and you're left with what looks like a figure 8. This can also be used as a stopper knot, and it is quite frequently used, or more often used, as a stopper knot compared to the overhand knot, because it is a more substantial knot, so it's less likely to slip through any kind of other knot or through an opening or anything like that. These two knots are useful as well if you wanted to kind of put the knot into a cleft or a saddle or a crotch in a tree, and then pull like that and have it hold its place. I've actually used these knots to tie a piece of string to a cliff edge so that I could set up a top where there were no trees available. So it can be useful in that sense. Okay, so that's the figure 8 knot, the simple one. If you take a bite in the rope like that and give yourself a little bit of rope to play with, you can tie a figure 8 on a bite, or a double figure 8 as it's also called. So it's the same motion except you're using the bite end of the rope as the working end. So sort of like the tip of the rope, and you just pass it round as you were going to tie a granny knot, but then round once more and pass it through to give you a figure 8 knot. And then of course you dress the knot, and there you have a perfect figure 8 knot on a bite, or a double figure 8. This knot is actually used by climbers as the preferred knot to tie when they attach their harness to when they attach their rope to their harness via a carabiner. So you tie this knot. You can tie this knot directly onto a harness, but then you have to pass this individual piece through the figure 8 knot and feed it through. So I can show you how to do that later, but for the moment this is a double figure 8 knot, or a figure 8 on a bite. One thing you can do to strengthen this knot or prevent it from slipping through is to tie a little overhand knot on the end like that, and that's kind of gives you a bit of insurance against the knot slipping through, which is highly unlikely, but it's always possible. What you also want to do with knots is you always want to make sure that whatever knot you tie, there's always a fairly long length of rope beyond the knot. Okay, so on the working end, so you can see I've left a few centimeters of excess rope, and that means that it's less likely to kind of accidentally feed through. If the rope was only up to that point there, it would very easily slip out and then break the knot. So that's the figure 8, very useful knot. The next knot I want to show you is a very, very important knot in sailing. When people go sailing or boating and do boating of any kind, often they want to put the rope over a post to quickly tie the boat or moor the boat at a dock or jetty, and or it could just be tying it to a stump on the bank. And the best knot for making a quick loop to tie over or to pass over a post or a mooring block is what's called a bowline. A bowline is basically a fixed loop, so it's a loop that doesn't move, and I'll show you how that works. But before I show you that, I'm going to show you a basic sliding loop like that. Okay, so that's an overhand knot on the standing end of the rope, and you can see I can increase the diameter of that loop as much as I want by just feeding it through. So this is a nice one. You could kind of tie it around something and it would attach like that. It would, the more tension you put on it, the more it's going to pull on. But of course you can see it's not a very, very sturdy knot because of it's based on an overhand knot. Okay, so that's basically a slip knot loop. So that's a very, it's the most basic of knots. But you see now if I pull through like that, it's going to come out. Okay, so that's the slip knot. The difference with the the bowline, sorry, is that you have your loop, but it's going to be a fixed loop. It's not going to move. So the way you tie it is you take the standing end and you turn a loop over like that. Okay, then you take the working end and you pass it through, and imagine a rabbit coming out of a hole. Then it runs round a tree. Okay, so it goes around the tree, and then it goes back into the hole. Okay, so that's basically how the knot is tied. And then you just pull it all tight, you dress the knot, okay, and you're left with a fixed loop. Okay, and that loop will very easily pass over posts, anything like a tree stump or a post that has been set on a jetty. So it's a very, very quick way of securing a boat. Incidentally, nothing on a boat, or especially a sailing craft, is called a rope, except the piece that rings the bell. Everything else is called something else. Okay, it might be called a sheet or a painter. A painter is basically a stretch of rope attached to the either end of a boat, and it was called that because the boats were suspended from the painters in order to paint them, in order to paint the boat. Okay, so there are other ways of tying this knot, and it can be tied very, very quickly, and I can show you how to tie that later on. I will show you how to tie that knot on a tree or on a post. Okay, so that's a very, very nice fixed loop. Of course, you can use that same concept and make a running loop by just having your rope like this, passing it under the standing end, and then tying the same knot, but this time you're tying the knot around the standing end. And so yeah, we have the bowline knot, but it's tied around the standing end, and you have a moving loop. So it's kind of like the moving loop that we had with the Slipknot. Okay, so that's the bowline. It's a very, very simple bowline. There are variations on it, and it can be used for many different purposes, including making a rope saddle or tying 3 loops in order to pull something from 3 different directions, for example, or have 3 different attachments. There are many different variations, but that's the basics of the bowline. The next knot I want to show you is basically a fisherman's knot, and I'm just going to get another piece of string to show you how that works. So when you want to join two pieces of string or two pieces of rope together, you might want to tie a fisherman's knot. It's not an ideal knot to tie two ropes together because it's difficult to get untied once it's been tied and once you put some strain on it, but it nonetheless is a useful knot. So basically what you do is you take two rope ends like that and you place them parallel. You take the one end and you tie a simple overhand knot like that around the other rope. Then you take the other working end of the other rope and you tie a simple overhand knot like that, of course leaving enough of a tail so the knot doesn't slip out. So there you have the two parallel ropes and they're tied with an overhand knot on the opposing rope, and then you just pull those two knots together and that creates a single fisherman's knot. You can strengthen this knot and make it more secure by tying a double fisherman's knot. So basically, instead of just tying an overhand, what you do is you just take this all out. Okay, so you have the two parallel ropes. You just tie a double, you pass a double loop around, so you go around twice before feeding the knot through. So there we go. So now you can see it's a double granny's knot, and likewise same thing here. You pass it around once and twice before passing it through. And then you have your double fisherman's knot, and then you can pull those two pieces together, and that's a nice secure knot. It's not going to come undone very easily, but once again, if you put a lot of tension on this rope, it's going to be very difficult to undo those knots. So essentially you're going to either have to live with those two pieces of rope being together, or you're going to have to cut them off. Okay, so that's the double fisherman's knot. Very, very useful knot for joining pieces of line together, and of course fishermen would use that to join their fishing line together. So obviously very important for that purpose. Other ways to join rope together is to use a kind of a reef knot. It's basically you form a bight with one end of rope, and then you take another end of rope and you pass it underneath. Let's try that again. Pass it underneath, around, and then back over and into the loop. Okay, so you see it's kind of it's made a nice reef knot there. Okay, and this knot is very, very good also for joining ropes. And what you can do to secure this is to tie an overhand knot on the one end, the way you would tie a fisherman's knot, like that, and likewise do that on the other side, like that. So there you have the reef knot, which moves like that, and you've got these stopper knots to prevent it from moving off, and there you have your two pieces of rope joined together. If you put pressure on it, it's not going to tie these knots too tightly, so you can easily get them undone. These are just there to work as stopper knots to prevent the whole knot from coming undone. It's very useful for joining ropes of two different diameters especially, and there's a variation on the reef knot, which is this one, which I'll show you right now. So you take your rope, once again you take a bight, and this is now called the sheet bend. I'm going to show you. So you take the rope, you pass the other rope through from the bottom, pass it round and back through, but instead of going through like that to make a normal reef knot, you're going to pass it through underneath the other piece and across, so it doesn't go right through, it goes across, and then you pull them together, and that is a sheet bend. It works better with 2 different diameter ropes. And then of course you can secure it with an overhand knot on this side and an overhand knot on this side. Yep. There we go. And that's a sheet bend. Sometimes you might have a piece of rope and you want to shorten the length of the rope temporarily, and then you would use a knot called a sheep-shank, and I'm going to show you how to do that with a length of rope right now. So this sheep-shank is made by producing 2 bites. Okay, so you've made a bite or bend in the rope on that end, you've made another bite or bend in the rope on that end, and then you take the rope, you twist a loop in it, and you pass that loop over the end like that. Okay, so there you have one end. Likewise with the other end, you twist a loop and you pass it over the end, and you kind of work that tight, and you can see now if you hold those 2 and then you put some tension on the rope, you can see it kind of holds. But if you release that tension, it's going to come undone. But for the moment, I'm going to just leave it like that for a second to have you look at that. So that's a sheep shank. That's if you want to reduce the length of the rope by, say, 1 meter. You could even do it by more, depending on how big these loops are that you make. But you could reduce the length of the rope temporarily. And if you want to reduce or release that piece, then you just release the tension and it all comes undone. This knot can be made much more secure if you wanted to shorten the rope temporarily, but you also wanted to make sure that it didn't come undone. You go through the same process. So you take your bite, you bend the loop in the rope, you pass the bite through that loop, you pull the loop together like that. Okay, but instead of just leaving it like that, okay, which is what the sheep shank would be, you can take the leading end of or working end of the rope and pass it through that loop, and you can do it on both sides. And what it ends up doing, I'm not going to do that because I've got a very long length of rope on the side, but anyway, so you pass it through there, and what it's done now is it's secured that loop. It's not going to come undone. Okay, so even if I release tension on the rope, it's not going to come undone, but it's very easy to undo once you've worked with the rope and you no longer need to shorten it. So that was the sheep shank. I have used that particular knot to make a sling and also a watch band, which I can show in another video. Okay, so those are some very, very useful knots as far as shortening ropes are concerned, tying ropes together, making loops, making ready loops. The next knot I'm going to show you is one of my favorite knots actually. It's called the Alpine Butterfly. It's a at face value it appears to be a very complicated knot, but it's actually a fairly simple knot to tie, and especially once you've learned how to do it. And it's a superior knot in my estimation because it can be pulled from 3 different directions. It is easy to undo it once it's had tension on it, and it's just a great overall knot, and you can use it to tie into an anchor point and to pull from 3 different directions if you're towing something, for example. But I'll show you the knot and then you can see from there. So what you do is you make a loop, and then you make another loop. So you've turned it over once. Okay, so let's start again. You make a loop, you push it over once. Okay, then you turn the loop over again so that you have 2 loops. Now imagine that this is a stick figure. You've got a man's head, you have his belly or torso, and then you have his spindly legs. Okay, now you take this knot, you take the head of the man and you put his head between his legs, and then you pull it back through the middle, through his belly. Okay, and then you just pull from both ends like that to dress the knot. And you see it's made a really nice, neat little knot. And that is an Alpine Butterfly. As I said before, you can put a lot of tension on it and it'll come undone. It's also good for pulling from 3 different directions. So you could have a tow hitch here and you might pull from 2 different directions. Maybe someone's trying to pull a vehicle out, and you have a team of men on this side and a team of men on that side pulling, and they can pull from those directions and use their knot effectively and still be able to undo it. It's very easy to undo. You just push the rope through this end and push it through that end, and it all just easily comes undone. The next knot I want to show you is actually called a hitch. It's a clove hitch, and it's used to tie a rope to an object like a post or a tree. It works on friction, and it's designed basically to hold a piece of rope very firmly, on a post or tree. It's a good knot to use if you are a sailor on a boat. If you don't want to use the typical bowline, this is a very, very secure way of tying your boat or mooring your boat on a post. So what you do is, let's assume this is the post. The simplest way to tie it is to make a loop like that, then make another loop twisting in the same direction, okay, but passing it behind the first loop. Then you put those 2 over like that, and you tie the knot. Okay, and what this does is it produces a nice little friction knot that pulls in itself, and it works very, very well on, as I say, on posts and trees. And as long as you pull with the rope parallel to the direction of the knot, as long as the force is in that direction, it's going to hold. Okay, and it can actually be sturdy enough to hold against, like let's assume you were going to make a Tyrolean traverse, and you needed a really, really tight rope in order to walk on, or make a really, really tight rope for moving a pack across the stream or whatever. This is a really, really great knot for putting it on and making sure that you can actually untie it. This knot is also used by technical tree climbers in the arborist industry because of its ease to tie and of its value in acting as a friction knot for a rope, for attaching a rope to a tree. So one way to secure this is to pass the free end around and then to tie a sort of half hitch like that. And actually, let me just loosen this a bit, make it a bigger one. So do the knot again. So you go once round to make the first loop, then you make another loop and you pass it behind, and then you pass them over the post like that, and you just pull the knot and dress it. Okay, so now I have the knot, and I want to just make sure that it's 100% safe. So then I can take that knot and make one half hitch and 2 half hitches like that, and now it's going to be incredibly secure. It's not going to come off because it won't pull out, and there you have a very, very secure knot. And if I can pull as hard as I like, it's not going to come undone. Okay, I'm putting a lot of force on this, and it's not budging. Okay, so that's a clove hitch, and then 2 half hitches to secure it. Okay, another variation on that is a round turn and 2 half hitches. So if you wanted to attach the rope to a post, you just pass the rope around. Okay, you could just pass it around once or twice, and then you do a half hitch. So it's just tying it around like that, and then you pass it around again like that. So that's 2 round turns and 2 half hitches, and basically that also is going to hold. It's going to be very, very sturdy. So those are 2 ways of tying a rope to a post. If you wanted to tie, remember the clove hitch, if you wanted to tie it to the post without passing, and you couldn't pass it over the end, let's say you had a tall tree and you couldn't pass it over the end and tie it like that, what you would do is, if you look at the shape of this knot, essentially what you would do is then just pass the knot around the tree and across the standing end, and then feed it through like that. There you have the same knot. Okay, so that's the clove hitch. Another interesting hitch to use when attaching ropes to poles, especially horizontal poles, is what they sometimes call a crow's foot or a lark's foot. It's basically made the same way, in a similar fashion. You make one loop and another loop, and instead of passing it behind like that, you twist the loop in the opposite direction and pass it behind. Okay, so I've done the 2 loops now, and I'm going to pass them through and just pull it all together. What you essentially are left with, there wasn't a very tidy way of doing it, but what you essentially are left with is the crow's foot or lark's foot. So it's a variation on the clove hitch, but far less sturdy. And this is more for attaching a doubled rope to a post so that it wouldn't slip. So you would basically take both ends of the rope, and here's another way to do it, by the way. So you would take both ends of the rope and hold them on one end, and you would make a bite or bend in the center of the rope, and then you would just fold it down like that and twist them around, pass it over the post, and there you have your lark's foot. And that's a good way to just attach a rope that's been doubled without it slipping out. Once again, just to recap the last few knots, we've got the clove hitch, which is one loop passed behind another loop like that, and then pulled taut. Okay, there you can see the knot. That's the clove hitch. The lark's foot or crow's foot is 2 loops, but they pass in the opposite direction like that to what you would have on the clove hitch, and there you get that kind of knot. Okay, or hitch. And then there's, of course, the round turn. Okay, and half hitches, 1 and 2. Notice that the half hitch can be done in 2 different ways. You could pass it around like this, as you see, but it's not very tight, and it's going to be more likely to come undone. What you can also do is pass it around the other way so that these 2 ropes sit parallel. You see that? and then you have a round turn with 2 half hitches. The next knot I'm going to show you is a knot that's very useful for securing one piece of string onto another, usually a rope, and allowing you to freely move that string up and down the rope, but secure it when you need it to secure. And it's used for tying tarps to ridge lines, securing them in a specific position, or for when a climber wants to actually hang on a rope without moving up or down while he or she works on setting up their gear. So the way you do it is you make a loop. So you take a piece of string and you tie a doubled figure 8 knot at one end of the string. There we have it. Okay, so you have your doubled figure 8 knot so that you have a loop. Okay, and then you take your line that you want to work on. So in this case we have the orange line here, and you want to attach this loop of string to that line. And the way you do it is you take the loop and you pass it over like that, and then you pass the one end through. Okay, so now you have a crow's foot, okay, or lark's foot, which I've shown you previously. Okay, so that's what would happen if you pass it through once. But that's not going to work for our purposes, because you can see it moves up and down, but it's not securing, it's not holding at all. Okay, so I need to tie something different. So what you do is you pass it over once again. So you pass the bite of the loop over like that, but instead of going through it once, you pass it over again, and even a third time. Okay, the whole time keeping all the ends of the line sort of aligned so that it's all packed neatly, 3 on that side and 3 on that side. Okay, and then you pass the base of the loop through like that. Okay, and now you dress the knot carefully, so you pull it all together. It's usually best to use a better grade material than like a spectra cord for this kind of thing, because it's a round cross-section rope rather than a flattened piece like this parachute cord. But anyway, this will work. So now what you've done is you've secured the loop onto this line. Okay, now if I pull from that side, it locks. If I pull from that side, it locks. But if I break the knot, it moves easily. It slides up and down on this line to whatever position I want. So there we go. Any point on the line I want it at, I can just break the knot like that with my fingers and just move it up and down. Okay, but the minute I've got it in the right place and I secure it to my tarp with some tension, you can see it holds, and the tension can hold in both directions. Okay, which is great. You don't want it moving in either direction. So it holds there and it holds there, and if I want to move it, I can adjust it like that. Very useful for setting up a ridge line on a tarp, or a perimeter line where you want to secure something to a specific point and you want it adjustable. So this is definitely one of the top sort of knot formations to use, the Prussik knot. There are variations on the Prussik knot, and some are used, or many are used actually, in the technical tree climbing industry, in the arborist industry, and some of them can actually allow for the movement in one direction and you know, sort of up, but securing in the downward position. So and there's any number of variations, and I'll probably do a video at some stage on those different knots. But this is a typical Prussik knot. So you've basically passed the loop over 3 times and then secured the knot. So let's go over it again. Here you have a loop that you've made with a figure 8 knot at the base. Obviously, depending on your needs, the size of the loop is going to vary. Usually you would want to work with a smaller loop, but it also depends on how far apart you know, your trees are that you're tying your ridge line to, versus where your top is going to go. Okay, so you take the bite or bend of the loop over the rope like that, underneath and over, and you pass it through the middle once, twice, and over again. Okay, you can do this as many times as necessary to get the requisite friction. Okay, and then you dress it all nicely. You can see I've dressed it all nicely. Now you have the loop, but to finally secure the knot, you pull the other end of the loop through like that, and then you slowly pull it all together, dressing the knot as you do so. Like I said, if you use round diameter spectra cord rather than this flat parachute cord, it comes out a lot better. It's a much neater knot, more effective knot. Okay, and there we go. Once you've dressed it all and you pulled it all tight, you have a nice clean Prussik knot, and you can tie this end or secure this end to your tarp, and then you can move this up and down to position it. Once you position it, you can put tension on your tarp and it's not going anywhere. Likewise, you can move it in that direction, and then you can put tension on in that direction and it's not going anywhere. Really, really useful knot, this. This next knot is a very, very useful knot. It's one of the simplest knots, and it's based essentially on a knot I've shown you already, which is the Slipknot. And although it's a simple knot, it's incredibly useful for a number of reasons, and I'll point them out to you as soon as I've made the knot. So basically, you take a length of string, and I'm going to tie it this way around because it's easier for me. So you take the length of string and you give yourself enough room to work with, and you pass it over the standing end, and you tie a granny knot. Okay, and now you've made a slip knot, and then you tie another granny knot on the end of that piece, which acts as a stopper knot. Okay, so now you have a slip knot or loop. Okay, and looks very simple, doesn't look that complicated, and you kind of think to yourself, well, how would I use this? You'll see very quickly how useful it can be. Obviously, anytime you want to roll up your sleep mat and you want to secure it, you can use rubber bands like this, or you can use one of these Canadian anchor knots, I think they call them. So you've taken the slip knot, you've made it like that, and you pull it tight like that, and notice it doesn't come loose. You put tension on it and it kind of holds. It holds its position. Very, very useful. So now you've essentially got a very easy knot to tie, and it works in the same way as these elastic bands work. You can easily pull it undone to get your top undone, your roll mat undone, and there you have your roll mat secured. If you wanted to sort of double up on that, let's just assume you were folding up sails on a mast to store them. You could use this knot as well, and then you can use another trick, which is to pass a loop like that around and over the end of the mat and run it down to sort of where you want to position it. Okay, put some tension on it, put some more tension, pull it again, and then do that. Now you're creating a kind of network of tension knots all the way along. So you can do it again. You pass the loop around like that, pass it over the end, and pull it tight, just keep pulling and then pull it tight again. If you wanted to hold it in place for a second, you could hold it like that with your finger and it's not going anywhere. If you want to secure it, you can hold it with your fingers like that and then just take a bite like that and bend it through, like fold it through once, that's a half hitch, and twice another half hitch, so it's a double half hitch, and then you've secured the whole thing. It's not going anywhere. Okay, you want to get that undone, it's very easy. You just pull it out and slip it out like that, and again you pull your slip knot out, and there you have it. Okay, the reason why I make a bite over here when I tie the half hitch is I've got this long piece of rope. It's very messy to try and tie a half hitch if you've got a long piece of rope. If you make a bite, you're shortening the rope, and then this is acting as the end of the rope rather than this, and then you can just tie your half hitches once, feed it through, and twice, and then you've got it. So this is a very good way to wrap up sheets of material, anything that you want to kind of secure, like a carpet, anything that you want to secure tightly and sort of in an ordered way. This is the way you would use it. Okay, so the good thing about this Canadian sort of anchor knot is not only can you use it for this purpose as I've shown you, but you can also use it as a tourniquet, okay, or tourniquet. So if you are bleeding profusely from a damaged artery, and you want to quickly block off that blood flow, then this is the knot to use. You tie the knot and you just pull like that, and it's gonna hold, and you can release the tension anytime you need to allow blood to flow temporarily, so you don't lose the limb until you can get help. Incidentally, just in terms of, let's go over this again, when you're tying these loops, as I've shown you, this is the easy way to get it around and to prepare and to tie these loops. Okay, so that's the one way, is to just wrap the loop around. The other way is to just simply pass it round like this, so the opposite direction, pass it round like this, and then feed it through, and you get the same effect. So you can either do that slow way, or you can just simply make a loop and pass it round. This loop technique can be very useful also for making rafts. When you're tying poles together, lashing them together, it can be a very quick way to secure and tighten posts together when you're making a raft. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some stage. But anyway, that's probably one of the simplest of knots you can learn, but definitely one of the more useful knots, especially if you want to tighten things on your pack, or tighten your roll mat, or fold up sails on a mast, neatly pack, fold the sails on the mast of a boat. So it has a lot of very, very practical uses. Well, I hope you enjoyed all of those knots. I think that these are the most essential knots that one should know for the outdoors. I've used them in all kinds of scenarios, whether it's boating, either on a motorized boat, canoe, or a kayak, or in climbing. I've rock climbed, I've rappelled. I've also worked as a tree climber and used a lot of these knots. And then of course securing things to vehicles, and in setting up washing lines, setting up tents and tarps. These knots have all been very, very useful. So I hope you enjoyed that, and please like and subscribe. Thank you.